Okay, we're going to pick up here in this video by starting with looking at the sources of bond returns. And in this case, we're talking about returns in dollars, not in rates or percentages. So bond returns can come from three sources. First is the coupon payments. So every 6 months, typically, you're receiving a income stream from the coupons. The second way you can have a bond return in dollars is through the capital gain, and by the way, that could be a loss just as easily over the investment horizon. If you're buying a bond and that gains in value over your investment horizon, you're getting some dollar returns that way. Of course, if the bond loses value over your investment horizon, you've got a negative return in dollars, and that's going to affect the cash that you end up with. Third is income generated from reinvestment of the interim cash flows. So typically we're going to be thinking about the coupon payments you receive. As an investor, as a portfolio investor, frequently you'll be taking that income generated from the bonds coupon payments and reinvesting that, redeploying that into income generating assets, typically other bonds, and so it matters what's happening in the bond markets. So current yield, we've already looked at this, is only concerned with the first portion of returns, the first source of returns, the coupon payments. Remember, the current yield is simply the coupon payments over the current price of the bond, so that current yield measure is just looking at the first one. Yield to maturity includes all three sources, but it assumes that the reinvestment of the income, so this third piece here, the reinvestment is at the promised yield, that rate, also known as the yield to maturity. And then likewise, the yield to call includes all three of these sources. But in this case, it assumes that the reinvestment rate is at the yield to call rate, that unique rate that we've already calculated. Let's move on here and look at some examples. So first, assume we have a 15-year bond with a 7% coupon that costs $769.41. What will your dollar returns be for the bond? So that is, what's the interest, the capital gain, and the reinvestment interest. And we're going to assume that we're going to hold this all the way to maturity. So if the bond is held to maturity, there will be 15 times 70, so $1,050 in interest paid. Now note, if the interest is actually paid every 6 months, we're going to have 30 payments of 35, but that still gives us $1,050 in payments. If the bond is held to maturity, there will be a $230.59 gain. Now this does assume, actually both this and the interest payments assume that the bond never defaults. If we ever have that issue, then we're clearly going to have a change in the cash flows received. But assuming no default happens and we hold to maturity, we'll have the $1,050 in interest, and we'll have a capital gain of $230.59. Okay, this third point here, if the bond is held to maturity and indeed earns a 10% return, then our ending cash will be this number, $33.25, which means the total dollar returns are going to be the difference between the $33.25 that we end up with and the $769.41 that we paid up front. The first thing I want to do is show you where that 10% is coming from. That's just the yield to maturity. So let's do the calculation real quick here. We've got a 15-year bond. Oh, first let me just start everything over. A 15-year bond with 2 periods per year is going to be 30 as the input for the number of periods. The 7% coupon means we're going to have coupon payments of 70. We need to divide those in half to get the payment. We're going to have $1,000 face value, $1,000 future value. The price is $769.41. So I'll enter that in as a negative number and compute the interest rate, and of course I need to double that to get the annual rate, the bond equivalent yield, and this has a shade of a rounding error. We're just going to assume 10%. So 10% is the yield to maturity, and so that's why we talk about if the reinvestment indeed earns 10%, that's a promised yield, the yield to maturity. So if we earn 10% on our bond over the course of the holding period, the 30 periods or the 15 years, that's what this calculation is doing right here, we end up with $3,325. So that means our gains, our dollar returns, are $2,555. Hopefully you can see that where that's coming from. And lastly, we have this calculation. The reinvestment income is going to be the difference between that $2,555 in total income that we've got and the $1,050 that we determined we had in interest payments, and the $230 that we determined we had in capital gains. So the residual, this $1,275, has to be reinvestment income, and that is the third portion. That's the income generated from reinvestment of the interim cash flows. So reinvesting those coupon payments will create $1,275 over this investment horizon of 15 years. So that's all three components in action here. We've got the coupon payments, we've got the capital gain, and we've got the reinvestment income. And you need to be able to determine each of these for a particular bond given bond characteristics and the holding period. Let's talk real quickly about reinvestment risk. That third component of return, the one we just looked at, happens to be a very important part of a bond's return. In this case, $1,275 is almost half of the total return of the bonds, and it's bigger than either of the other two pieces. So it's bigger than interest paid, it's bigger than the capital gain. The reinvestment income dominates the returns in this particular example. And that's going to be true for a couple of things. So bonds with a long time to maturity or a high coupon rate, the reinvestment income is a very significant portion of that bond's returns. So reinvestment risk is the risk that we face that our reinvestment rate won't be as high as we're planning. So it's the risk that rates will go down as we're receiving cash flows, and when we reinvest those, we're not going to get the returns that we anticipated. So this second bullet point would make a very good conceptual question. So make sure you understand reinvestment risk, what things affect it, how it affects it, why it affects it. Those would be good kinds of conceptual questions, certainly on reinvestment risk. Okay, we're going to go ahead and stop here before we get into this next and actually the last topic of the chapter that we're going to cover here in the videos, and that's looking at total return or the horizon return. It's a bit more involved in terms of the computations and calculations, so I want to save that for the next video. We'll go through all of this and hopefully finish up the slide presentations for the measuring yields content, and I'll see you next time.